good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Michael Schwartz Library. Thank you for braving the chill and joining us for this 50th Anniversary Perspectives event. My name is John Soder. I'm Senior Writer in University Marketing here at CSU, and it's my privilege to serve as your moderator this morning. As Cleveland State University continues to celebrate its golden anniversary, we're here to discuss the history of CSU with two people who are as well-versed on the subject as anyone. So please join me in giving a warm CSU welcome, keyword warm, to Dr. Regina Williams and Mr. William Becker. A little bit about our panelists. Dr. Williams is the author of the new commemorative book, Cleveland State University 50 Years, which I had the pleasure of editing. At CSU, Dr. Williams earned a bachelor's degree in urban studies in 1986, a master's in public administration in 1990, and a bachelor's degree in liberal studies in 2012. She holds a doctorate in history from Case Western Reserve University. Dr. Williams is an associate professor of history at CSU and founder and director of the Initiative for the Study of Religion and Spirituality in the History of Africa and the Diaspora. She received a Fulbright Fellowship for Research and Teaching in Ile-Ife, Nigeria in 2010. Thank you for being here, Dr. Williams.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Becker graduated from CSU in 1973 with a bachelor's degree in history. The following year, he received his master's degree in history from Case Western Reserve University and joined the staff of the CSU Archives. He was named University Archivist in 1977. Thank you for being here, Mr. Becker. A quick programming note, we're going to cover 50 years of history here in approximately 40 minutes flat, so fasten your seatbelts. We have reserved time at the end for a Q&A, so if you have any questions, and I certainly hope you do, I'll just ask you to save them for the end of the program, and we'll have you step up to the mic, and we'll be happy to take your questions as well. So, before we delve into the history of CSU, I want to start by getting to know each of you a little bit better. In addition to currently working at the university, both of you are alumni. Let's begin by hearing just a little bit about your time here at CSU. We'll start with you, Dr. Williams.
Okay. Well, I started here as a freshman in the fall quarter of 1977, having just graduated from Hawken Upper School in Gates Mills, Ohio. I had been accepted to Case Western Reserve University, and my goodness, they're very expensive. It's a wonderful institution. I got there eventually for the PhD program, but I didn't like the student loan debt that was part of my financial aid package with Case Western. So I came to Cleveland State University, where my fiance was a student. He later became my husband, but he was here already. My older sister was also here in the College of Education. I had visited the campus many times, and I really liked what I saw here. And I could afford it. And I could get a job in downtown Cleveland and work and go to school and be home before the sun sets. So it just worked for me. At Case, I would have been required to live on campus as a first-year student, and that just wasn't something I was interested in doing because I was engaged to be married at the time, and finally tied the knot at the ripe old age of 19 to the guy who was my fiance when I was a freshman. But it's just, it was a really good experience for me, I think, to be here on this campus from 77 until 86 when I finally got the first degree. When you start to combine work and family, not just the husband, but a baby or two before you get the bachelor's degree, it takes a while. So it took me almost 10 years to get the first degree. And then I never stopped. It was wonderful after I got my first full-time job on campus to be able to have 2 classes paid for. And that made it much easier for me to graduate with the bachelor's and the master's without all of the student loan debt that's becoming so problematic, I think, for a lot of the students of the 21st century.
Thank you. How about you, Mr. Becker?
I was a typical CSU student back in 1969. I was first in my family to go to college, and CSU was a commuter school. I too faced financial problems, so I came here because I could afford it because I could live at home. The campus was entirely different. The atmosphere was like going to 13th grade. It was so much like high school all over again back then. The campus You have picture this in your mind. It ended at the science building. The science building just opened that quarter I started. Fenn Hall, which was Stillwell Hall, was open. They had these temporary classroom buildings that were where the phys ed building is now, and that's where most of your classes were. There was another building called Foster Hall that was sitting where Jolka, the education college, is, and Fenn Tower. That was the campus. This area was, we see now was under construction, and all you saw of it was these big wooden walls, whitewashed as you walk by every day. You could look through the gaps in the wall and see how progress was going. And the main landmark in the area was the crane on top of Rhodes Tower as it was going up.
Good. All right. Thank you, Mr. Becker. So, Jeff, can you get us started? We have some slides playing behind us. These are kind of like our memories in no particular, well, they're in chronological order, a little fuzzy at times, but this will kind of guide us along the discussion as well. So CSU is in the middle of celebrating its 50th anniversary, but the university's roots actually go back a lot further than that. Can you tell us just a bit about the prehistory of CSU?
CSU was, before this, was actually a private college, a small private college called Fenn College. And it came out of the YMCA program. After the First World War, there was a market for higher education in the United States, and that was a number of colleges were taking advantage of it, and then and part of that was the YMCA. There was supposedly about 13 YMCA schools throughout the United States that started colleges. Here it was called the Cleveland YMCA School of Technology. The Y had an educational program. Most of that was designed to acculturate immigrants and also provide vocational training to anybody who wanted it. But in 1923, they upgraded the program and they started college-level courses. And that, the first graduating class was 27. In 1930, they changed the name to Fenn College from the Cleveland YMCA School of Technology. The lore is that they changed the name because the students didn't like YMCA on diploma. It wasn't classy, you know. So the school started with two colleges, business and engineering. They had and then in 1935 they started a college of arts and sciences, and those are the three colleges that became the first three colleges of CSU, and when the school was taken over. Fenn ran into problems after this, into the 50s with money.
Okay, you're already,
Yeah.
you're anticipating the next question we all want to know. How did we go then from Fenn College to Cleveland State University in 1964? This is, I'm sure, a pretty complicated answer, but what was the kind of the main driving force behind that?
Sputnik. That's a simple answer. You had the whole crisis in American education. You know, we're falling behind the Russians. The Russians have put up a satellite in orbit. You know, they're going to take over the United States. The American education system is failing. And so there was a man named James Rhodes ran for Senate, for the governor of the state of Ohio. And one of his platforms was to have a state college. We needed more colleges. We needed engineers. We needed people in the sciences. We're losing ground. And he wanted a state college within a 30-mile radius of everybody in the state. And part of that was, Fenn looked at this as an opportunity. They were barely making it by. They were scraping by every year with just a couple of bucks left over in the budget after the end of the year. And they came up with the Fenn plan, which was basically saying to Columbus, hey, here we are, take us over. And so they there was members of the Senate, Ohio legislature, like Patrick Sweeney, Joe Bartunek. They got legislation through creating Cleveland State University in December of '64. Then there was a period of negotiation between Fenn and CSU people, and so the state of Ohio took over everything of Fenn College. It was like a plug-and-play situation for them. They had the degree or granting authority, they had the curriculum, they had the faculty, they had the staff, they had the campus. So what happened on September 1st, 1965, was they replaced the president with somebody else, and the school just kept going as it was.
Dr. Williams, in the book, we have a quote from Dr. Harold Anderson, CSU's first president. Dr. Anderson said, "New colleges and universities are being created throughout the land, but is there another city where so much has been done in so little time?" Can we talk just a bit about how quickly CSU came together and the pace of that? What kinds of challenges did that create?
Well, in thinking about part of President Emerson's comment, so much in such a short period of time in this same city, it wasn't just the four-year institution that was coming into being in that era. There were things happening at the community college level as well. And I think that was perhaps part of the incentive to have the four-year institution in place, because the junior college certainly can do wonderful work, but there are things that happen on the campus of a four-year institution that can't necessarily happen in the same way on the campus of a two-year institution. So again, I think it was, and I love this decade, the 60s, not just Clevelanders on the move, but the nation itself, especially by the middle of the decade, with so much happening in Washington, D.C., on the watch of President Lyndon Baines Johnson, and the promise of a great society, greater even than it was in the days of Camelot, when President Kennedy was there for a little season until his assassination in 1963. But I really do believe that President Johnson meant what he said about building a greater society, declaring eventually unconditional war on poverty, and then coming to see, along with other people in the 1960s, that education was going to be an essential part of building that new society where ordinary people, working class people, could realize their dreams of going to college, and that there would be some public support to help them earn that degree along the way.
Okay, we have two historians here, so we're going to take advantage of this. Some people I can see remember 1964. Some people were not around for it.
Oh.
You've started to provide some historical context. Can you just speak a little, give us a little more information about what was happening nationally and locally, and kind of how the milieu, that milieu of the mid-'60s, shaped this young university as it was getting off the ground?
Well, again, for me, the promise of the Great Society is there, but there are obstacles in the way of President Johnson and other people achieving or building that Great Society. It's also on President Johnson's watch that we're going to have the escalation of the war in Southeast Asia. And a lot of the young people who perhaps would have gone to college actually end up going to war. And some of those who are left behind, including students here at Cleveland State, are joining the anti-war movement. Even as other people are celebrating, or at least recognizing, the sacrifices that military personnel are making in the 1960s. So these are some really heady times in American history. And I don't want to say that Cleveland is the United States writ small, but I do believe, and certainly I'm going to defer to my colleague here on a lot of the stuff that happens during the Fenn College era. Bill Becker is very modest. He didn't tell you that he wrote the book on Fenn College, right? So we just let him go because he's going through the timeline. But certainly he knows that era, the prehistory of what eventually becomes Cleveland State, much better than I do. I'll pick it up in 64, 65. But again, a lot of what we're experiencing on this campus, in the surrounding community, in the 1960s, is very much a reflection of what's happening in the larger society. It's a decade, the 1960s, where we have not only the escalation of the war in Southeast Asia and also the war on poverty, which the president will lose, but we also have a civil rights movement. We have the nascent women's movement. All of that is happening on this campus, as small as it was in the 1960s and early 70s. Our students are very much aware that the people in Cleveland live in the world. And they're concerned about injustice at the local level, at the state level, the national level, and the international level. And it was really eye-opening, I'd have to say, for me to look back at those early years of Cleveland State and to know that we had that international presence on the campus, and then students actually engaging in a major way in all of the movements that helped shape the decade of the 1960s.
It's interesting to watch the change. Cleveland State, when I came here, was very conservative. The idea was, the typical idea for the student was, I want my 4 classes, bang, 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 bang. I'm going home, I got a part-time job. Nobody stayed around. A lot of them came from working class families. Even though this was a liberal community, voted Democratic, people weren't really active in community affairs. They weren't really interested in it. When I first got here, they were not interested in the war. In fact, you're talking about the war. The original demonstrations, the original protests started coming from the faculty members, not from the students. And there's reports like in the Cauldron of a small group of protesters are outside Fenn Tower, and the kids upstairs are dumping water on them from the 3rd floor. They were not popular. It didn't really start picking up until October of the fall of '69, when they had the first big protest outside of the Science Building.
You know, I remember that article that you referred to about the small group of student protesters, and then the ones who are higher up dumping the water. But I think that's something important that with some help from my friends who were reviewing the manuscript, and also my colleagues in the library, we were able to achieve. And that's the balance, to say that it wasn't all pro-war, as far as war hawks are concerned, on the faculty or among the students on campus, but there were people on both sides. And certainly the numbers grew as we moved through the 60s and got into the 70s as the war continued to escalate. But the balance in the final analysis is there, that people were able to think for themselves and not necessarily choose a side, but to say that there's more than one side to any argument, and I like that about our students. As busy as they were with their work, even when we didn't have an auditorium that could accommodate a speaker, they were in the sanctuaries of churches in the community, the First Methodist Church at 30th Street or Trinity Cathedral, but the gatherings took place, and speakers came from all over the country, especially in the 1970s, as we continued to build on this side of Euclid Avenue, but very often we were hosting events at partner institutions, I'd have to say, religious institutions and others in the city of Cleveland.
Okay. All right, we're in the 1970s now. So in 1973, Dr. Walter Wagen becomes president of CSU. He is, correct me if I'm wrong, the only CSU president to have played in the NFL. That's all we're going to say about that. You got to read the book if you want the full story. He's also the university's longest-serving president from 1973 until 1988. That's 15 years, a long time. What were the key moments, kind of, how did the university grow during the Wagen era?
Academically and physical plant-wise, too. Originally, when the CSU was created, the legislation creating it said that they needed to create an educated workforce. That was the motivation for it. Rhodes was a conservative. James Rhodes was never going to be looked upon as being a liberal. And that's what their idea was. We needed trained people in the workforce. But once you let loose the university, there's other forces taking place, and one of the first times is Dr. Albert Cousins, who hosts an institute on urban poverty in 1967. Out of that comes the movement headed by Dr. Thomas Campbell for the establishment of the Institute of Urban Affairs, which is the forerunner of the College of Urban Affairs. And so things are starting to change. Also, with the decision by the administration that we're going to be a research facility. We're not just going to be a teaching college. We're going Although Anderson denied it, that we're going to try to be the Harvard on the Cuyahoga. That wasn't our motivation, but we wanted to be an research institution, so there was the formation of the College of Graduate Studies. And you had a lot of graduate programs coming online. They started before Walter Wagen, but they came online, especially the PhD programs in analytical biology, chemistry, and those were our first two. And also in the sciences, we had a number of graduate programs come online on him. Under him, the big opening was the opening of University Center, our award-winning building, which is now was built on the site of the present Student Center.
Who remembers University Center? All right. So for the benefit of those who weren't here then, what was the Cage?
Well, the cage was an interesting place to be in the world, and some people said a lot of wasted space, but it was a place where student organizations could certainly congregate. I believe student government was on the 3rd floor at that time. The Women's Comprehensive Program was there. Certainly one of the things that happens on President Wagen's watch is that the student body becomes increasingly diverse. And some of the greatest challenges associated with our struggle to diversify the faculty and also the administration, those things take place on his watch as well. In addition to all of the buildings and the building up of the academic programs. So again, in the student center, or I'm sorry, the university center, we had an auditorium, 500-seat green auditorium, of course, you know, our colors as Vikings. One thing I remember about the Student Center and that auditorium, and one complaint that frequently came from the faculty members, was that we don't have an auditorium on this campus that can accommodate all of the full-time faculty members, because I believe at that time we had between 600 and 700 full-time faculty members. Now there are fewer than 500. So that auditorium's gone. It could have accommodated all the full-time people, but lots of things, I think the seeds for change were sown in the 70s and the 80s, even for some of the things that we're seeing now with the makeup of the faculty here, full-timers versus part-timers. So again, I think the university is struggling to grapple with some of those challenges that are posed by the escalating tuition. And that was something that students really began to talk about on President Wagen's watch. And also the increasing costs associated with offering a quality education, and then offering the kinds of technology in the classroom that will help students compete, I think, in a world where technology is increasingly important in the classroom, and also for those people who are, I guess, acquiring their learning on a distance learning basis. Yeah, but again, I see the seeds for that. I seem to recall that that's what was happening. I like to say that President Wagen was my president, because he was in place when I came in '77.
For those who haven't ever seen University Center, the cage was the back portion of it, and it was 5 stories high, and it was encased in glass. It was a great place. There were strange events held in there. When we got ROTC, they used to have yearly rappelling, where they would rappel down University Center from the top. And we had a number of pigeons also who lived there.
Yeah. Yeah, I liked all the international flags they had in the area too. I think there was a flag there for every nation. And I think I've seen those flags, I'm trying to think, well, I know they have some of them, especially for the African nations, in the Black Studies program, which used to be in the cage area of the old University Center building. It was relocated to the main classroom building on the northern side. But again, we're accommodating all of those same programs that used to be in the cage area. Now a lot of them have moved, along with Women's Comprehensive Program and Black Studies, over to the main classroom building. Yes.
Okay, good. Still staying briefly in the 70s, one thing Dr. Williams does very well in the book is provide a lot of context in terms of what's going on across the country and specifically in Cleveland. Let's think back to the late 70s in Cleveland weren't a particularly great time. The city, among other things, went into default. Could you give us any sense of how the city's ups and downs affected the university?
Well, I think some of those ups and downs, the ones that are most memorable for me, we'd have to begin to look at in the 1960s. And I'm thinking of the image where Mayor Carl Stokes is there on the platform for the homecoming parade at Cleveland State University. And so, of course, he is elected in 1967 as the first mayor, African-American mayor of a major American city. And so that's a major milestone, I think, in the nation's history and also in African-American history. But he serves 2 terms. And so he's out early 1970s. And it is our concern. Again, we didn't cause a default that took place in the 1970s or any of the other problems, including the river burning several times. That's not the fault of anybody, in particular at Cleveland State. But I think even at that early period, with Dr. Albert Cousins and Professor Mary Joyce Green and Dr. Butler Jones, the sociologist, leading the way, I think the faculty and many of the students come to believe in the 1960s and the 70s especially that we have a responsibility to people in the surrounding community. We're not going to solve all their problems by writing papers and presenting them at academic conferences or publishing books or even eventually establishing a department or a school of social work, but we can help. And we can offer some recommendations for dealing with the urgent needs of a lower class and working class population, a lot of those people who need a little help, maybe need somebody to lay a foundation, perhaps, for their children so that they can take a stand on higher ground and access the educational opportunities that will increasingly be available on this campus. So again, I hear people calling for that in the 1960s on Mayor Stokes' watch. I hear it in the early 70s when we have Mayor Perk in place. Certainly when Mayor Kucinich, the youngest mayor, I believe, he was about 29 perhaps when he was elected, people are looking to City Hall. And again, those aren't necessarily our problems, but some of our graduates are going to get jobs down there. For example, the current mayor is a 3-time alum from Cleveland State University. So I don't think we can isolate ourselves as people who spend most of the day in the academy from what happens at City Hall. And that becomes, at least for me as a student, increasingly clear in the 1970s and 80s, especially when Mayor Voinovich is in office and George Forbes is president of City Council. Those were some really interesting times, I think, for students as well as faculty and for voters in the city of Cleveland.
Okay, you mentioned the 1980s. I'm going to take us there. Let's talk a bit about student life. Viking Hall opened in 1986. That added 454 new beds for resident students. Up until that time, what were living arrangements like on campus?
If you were looking at the slides, you may have seen 2 women, the heads of 2 women together. They represented the first women to move into the dormitories at CSU. At the time when CSU was created, the dormitories were floors 11 and up on Fenn Tower. That was the whole thing. They did rent rooms in the Y for athletes and that, but basically this was strictly a commuter school. And so there were on the site right now where the medical building is going up, there was an apartment building, an old apartment building called the New Amsterdam. It had really classy architecture, but they tore it down and they put up this big concrete block building called Holiday Inn. And Holiday Inn never took off. It was a losing proposition. And CSU bought Holiday Inn and renamed it Viking Hall back in the 80s. And that was the dormitory until Fenn Tower was allowed to lapse into decay. It was closed. It was declared later on it's going to be declared surplus property. They lease it out to a private company which renovates Fenn Tower, practically does everything but the 3rd floor. And that becomes the dormitory. And so we had 2 dormitories for a while until they opened up the village, campus village. And since that time, you may have seen the old Viking Hall go down.
So Viking Hall was a Holiday Inn?
Yeah.
Did they have real tiny soap in the dorm?
Yeah, because
You don't have to answer that. So CSU athletics provide a lot of fodder for the highlight reel over the years. We'd be remiss if we didn't just touch on arguably the greatest moment in the history of CSU athletics, the men's basketball team's Cinderella story in the 1986 NCAA tournament. Some of you probably remember. Just back then, how we're coming up on March Madness again, how mad was March that year?
I'd like to make one correction there, not correction, but put in a footnote. The first time the university really gets national attention is in '75 for the sports. They host the NCAA Division I Swimming and Diving Championships at their brand new pool in which is now the Busby Natatorium in the Phys Ed building. And it got a lot of attention because of its construction. It had the gutters in there, which took away the action of the waves, impeding the swimmers. And they set all kinds of records for speed records that year. Southern Cal, Tennessee, they were just breaking records, one right after another that year. It was had such an effect that they came back 2 years later in '77 and held them again. And then later on, they came back for a third time. So this was the first time CSU really got a positive recognition throughout the United States. Then you have the basketball team, the March Madness. And that put CSU on the national notice because they took on Indiana, who had a legendary coach, Bobby Knight. Indiana had won a number of national championships, and this ragtag team from Cleveland just ran them off the court. Then they, if you're basketball fans, CSU went on to the Sweet 16, and they got beat by a Navy team who had David Robinson as their center. Yeah.
Well, I'm not the sports fan. I was always such a klutz when I was a kid, even when I was skinny. Always the last one to be chosen. Why did they have people choose the folks who would be on the team? But I got there, and they would pitch the softball, and I would duck. But I do remember in the 1980s that I became a basketball fan at Cleveland State. And it was, talk about madness. It's hard to ignore. And I remember 2 names. One, Sean Hood, because Sean Hood and I took a research class together. And it's like, I have a basketball star sitting across the aisle from me. And also Franklin Delano Edwards, Frank Edwards, we called him. I didn't know he was FDE, not FDR. But coming from New York, he's got the name, right, of this great Democratic president from the 1930s and 40s. But in any case, he was one of the first to graduate from Cleveland, I'm sorry, not graduate, but to leave the university and join the NBA. So he was a great athlete. I thought he was a very nice guy. And again, in the 1980s, I learned to appreciate what athletes do. I'm still a klutz, but I learned to love sports because it just made you feel so proud to be a Viking, to know that you had a winning team, at least in basketball.
Great. Okay, so Dr. Wagen, the longest-serving president, is succeeded by the university's shortest-serving president, Dr. John Flower, who led CSU from 1988 to 1992. What were some of the milestones of the relatively brief Flower era?
Music and Communications building opened. Unfortunately for Dr. Flower, he inherited a situation on campus that erupted. There was charges of racism on campus by one of the education faculty members, Janice Hale Benson. And she took her case to George Forbes, and it sort of put a black mark on the university. And the trustees formed a civic committee, and they made all these recommendations. And part of this was to create a division of minority affairs, and that raised another problem for them. There was a dispute between the man who occupied the position, Dr. Ronald Winbush, and the administration, and it led to Dr. Winbush being released. it was always argued that did he quit or was he fired. Then one side said one thing, one side said the other. But that it was a tough time for the image of the university. But you want to handle the rest?
The rest.
Yeah.
It's still the 1980s.
Yeah.
And those charges of racism and discrimination of various sorts, as a result of the investigations by the Blue Ribbon Committee, there were people from the surrounding community and also students and faculty and staff who served on that committee. They discovered that there was some merit to those charges, and the university needed to do some things to address those concerns, especially of the students who were members of the campus community. And one of the things that they did was, as she said, hire Dr. Ray Winbush.
Sorry.
Yeah, well, his brother, Ron, but Dr. Ray Winbush was the first vice president for, at that time, I think they were calling it Minority Affairs. And he was here for a little season in the late 80s. And in refusing to sign his contract or being fired, he left. And so the Winbush affair, I think, was the catalyst for a very lengthy student protest. They were occupying Fenn Tower. That's where the president's office was at that time. There were a number of marches along Euclid Avenue. There were protests at Tower City. There were a lot of students demanding that the administration somehow provide a means for them to have their grievances redressed. And the community, the university community, especially the administration, to their credit, you know, they listened to the students. Now, the students, I don't think they got everything that they asked for, but there was this give and take. And I think we were a stronger university as a result of all those things that we went through. And again, unfortunately, when the Music and Communications building opened with that new auditorium that could accommodate more than 500 faculty members and was just an amazing, and still is, an amazing performance space, there were protests continuing when the university had its 25th anniversary, the silver anniversary. I remember Bobby Short was here, splash of silver, you know, great music inside and a lot of angry people on the outside. And Dr. Flower was an amazing musician. So he and Bobby Short performed in the midst of it all, and we survived the 1980s. And again, as far as the black mark on the university, there had been ongoing concerns about things that were happening on campus, and it wasn't just the communities of color where those students were complaining, but women. Certainly Professor Mary Joyce Green, eventually Dean Peg Polly Kirshner, who became the Dean of Student Life. They were concerned also about securing and then protecting the rights of women on campus. So there were, again, a lot of people who were pushing to establish, I think, a more democratic campus community, and they won a lot of those battles.
Okay. We got to hit about 25 years and 10 minutes now.
Uh-oh.
So coming out of this challenging chapter, Dr. Claire Van Ummerson is president of CSU from 1993 until 2001, did not play in the NFL, but was the first and so far only female president of CSU. How did the university evolve under her leadership?
Well, again, I think she's a brilliant scientist, first of all. And one of the great things about working on this project is that I had a chance to interview her and sit with her for almost 3 hours after breakfast and just talk about the state of the university, especially from the vantage point of women. And one of the things I asked her is, you know, have we have changed as an institution over time. You know, we both agreed on that, but we haven't resolved all of the issues that really came to the fore in the 1980s. But certainly the campus experiences as we move through the 1990s, tremendous growth. And if I can say, for example, and sometimes it's hard to tell when the proposal comes out without having the timeline in front of you and when the building actually goes up. But I know in the 1980s, the Urban College was in a building on the corner of East 18th and Euclid, a little tiny building that they shared with the Cleveland Baptist Association. And eventually we had this amazing 17th, 18th Street project, which includes the new complex now with the home for the Maxine Goodman Levin College of Urban Affairs and also the Business College. And so all of those things are continuing, through the 1990s. And it seems like everything just is put on fast forward as soon as President Schwartz comes early in the 21st century. But I see that happening on President Van Amerson's watch. And again, I see a lot of research by men and women, especially in the College of Science. There's a lot of that that's documented as well. It's associated with the decade of the 1990s. So I think that I know that there is a lot of support for research by faculty members and also support for expanding the boundaries of our campus community here in downtown Cleveland.
I think one other thing should be credited to Dr. Van Amerson's administration. This was the time when they started trying to link up all the offices and the departments in the university by computers. And so you have that. And so, CSU was among the early ones to start doing this. And so there were rough spots for it, but her administration was the one who led the charge to get us into the age. CSU had a reputation for the CSU shuffle. Nobody knew any answers. You wanted, if it was problem solved, they'd send you to this office, and that would send you to that office, and you'd end up going back to where you originally started. And a lot of students were unhappy with that. But
Thank God that doesn't happen anymore, right?
it happens less. But her administration should be credited with that.
Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Dr. Williams.
Well, I know President Van Amerson got a lot of bad press because of major problems associated with the implementation of the PeopleSoft software program. And I was surprised once I started to dig through the minutes for the Board of Trustees and all of the other evidence, a lot of it housed in university archives here in the library, and a lot of it available online because you've already organized it that way. And there's more in special collections across the hall, sort of, from the archives. But there was so much negative press in the 1990s about PeopleSoft and students not receiving financial aid and all kinds of problems that it tended to overshadow, in many ways, a lot of the good things that President Van Amerson accomplished on her watch. And I was really pleased to see that there was a lawsuit related to PeopleSoft, that there was a settlement, and every dollar that we lost as a result of the settlement, the university was able to recoup. And as a result of the settlement, we were able to establish the honors program at Cleveland State, one of our major brag points now, and now we can brag about having an honors college thanks to the Mandel family. So again, I give President Van Amerson credit. We weren't the only ones struggling with PeopleSoft, but as she said to me, she became the lightning rod for all the criticism, but in the end, she prevailed, and we're better now, and we still have PeopleSoft. That was another question. If it was so horrible, why do we still have it? Some aspects of it, someone in IS&T told me, and I won't mention his name because he didn't know that I was going to be paraphrasing his remarks today, but he said to me, in many ways, it's the best thing that's out there for some aspects of the PeopleSoft program. Yes.
All right. Congratulations. We've now arrived at the 21st century. Still a couple more administrations to cover. Dr. Michael Schwartz, after whom the library is named, was president from 2001 to 2009. He jokes about being remembered as the guy who put the green letters on top of Rhodes Tower. What else should we remember about that particular era?
My goodness, there are so many great things that I can recall about President Schwartz and the way that he did things. There we began to brag, or at least this is what I associate with that era, about Cleveland State University and its tremendous growth and the fact that we cast the largest footprint of any downtown institution in the city of Cleveland. And the footprint is getting bigger, right? And it's not just the green letters at the top of Rhodes Tower, but it's the renovation that's happening with Fenn Tower. And it's just a beautiful place to be in the world. It's an award-winning building because of those changes that take place in Fenn Tower. People are proud to say that they live in Fenn Tower. A lot of those offices that were on the first floor, including the registrar's office, where I started working in 1981, moved. The cashier's office, which is now a theater on the first floor of Fenn Tower. Everything's just been transformed. There's a food service court on the first floor. There's a computer lab. None of those things were there in the 70s and early 80s when I was working in Fenn Tower. But again, that is transformed on the watch of Michael Schwartz. And then the signage. You have a really clear sense that you're on Cleveland State University's campus, because people would just walk in off the streets, if there's a public program and there's food, people just come in, blend in with the crowd. But, and maybe that's not such a good thing, that I think there was a sense that, there's some people who belong and some people who don't, but there's a concern with making the campus community safe. Making sure that students have their ID cards, that they can access the services that they need, that we know who's in this community, because we've had some tragic things to happen on this campus as well, related to crime. And so campus safety, certainly I associate that with the era of Michael Schwartz. The raising of standards, well, we always had standards. I think they got a lot higher when President Schwartz came, and he had this rich history of being a great administrator at Kent State University. And he had such a track record of doing so many great things. You wonder, well, can he bring anything new to Cleveland State? He brought a lot of new things to Cleveland State. And I think perhaps that honors program in our college is one of the things that we can be most proud of when we think about his contributions to this university.
One more thing to add is he opened up the campus, as he said a number of times. You have to understand, when CSU was established, this area was industrial buildings, residential hotels, apartment buildings, flop houses. And when the original construction, this area, University Center, there's a picture of it down at the other end in the display area. You can see it was called, Steve Litter, the plain dealer, calls it urban brutalism. Everything was focused inside the plaza. And that it was like the university was saying to the mommies and daddies of Greater Cleveland, you can send your kids here; they'll be safe, because Cleveland had a bad rep for crime and that. And Schwartz changed that. University Center went down. You have the opening up. Now Student Center looks more inviting to come in. The campus village. The apartment buildings over here, trying to invite people into the area to live here, rather than just this campus as an oasis in an area of poverty.
Okay, good. That's a good segue. Get your questions ready, because this is the last question I'm going to ask them. We want to hear from you. But this brings us right up to the present, more or less. Dr. Ronald Berkman becomes president of CSU in 2009. You're both historians, not soothsayers, and this isn't very far in the rearview mirror yet. But when people look back on this particular era in CSU history, the era we're all living in now, what do you think they're going to talk about? What will they remember when they do this again in the library 50 years from now?
I think that people will make note of the fact that we've had, as an institution, and I can't take credit for what President Berkman or what President Schwartz did, we've had a lot of success in establishing student scholarship funds, especially. The philanthropists have been kind. The endowment is large, much larger than it was even when President Flower was in place. I believe then it was less than $10 million. Now it's over 70 million. And it's not because of anything that the historians did. It's because we had people who were willing to go to the foundation community and also to individual donors and say that there are wonderful things happening on this campus. And we want to make sure that more students are able to take advantage of the opportunities that are available to them on this campus. And with tuition going up and state appropriations going down for higher education, the only way we can make that happen is if we have scholarships. And we have a lot of them now, thanks to the fundraising efforts of the people at the top. And certainly with the support from folks in the foundation office and the annual giving program. Faculty and staff do their part, but millions of dollars have come in, and I think the students have been the primary beneficiaries.
Okay, and on that note, we will open it up to your questions. Obviously, we can hear you if you just stand up, but I would ask you to use the microphone because we are recording today, and future generations will treasure your questions, so speak into the mic if you would. Don't be shy. We'll take a comment.
I didn't realize how much part of the history of the university that I'm a part of. And I was hired during that bad mark of the racism period. And I was hired in 1988. And I didn't realize all of that was going on. But I have to say, I've been here over 27 years now, and I didn't have to experience none of that. Racism or someone calling me out of my name or any of that. And I'm a proud employee of Cleveland State University.
So let me turn the table. May I ask you a question? What's your name?
My name is Nidra Heyman.
Nidra, where do you work?
I work here in the Michael Schwartz Library.
In the library.
Yes.
So when you walk around campus today, as opposed to back then, what changes jump out at you? Have you noticed dramatic shift in things around here?
Yes, the student life has changed. It's more energetic, and people used to just like come and go. And when I go in student center now, I can't even hear. That's what it's called now. Yeah, student center. I can't hardly hear myself for all the students and all the activity and all the rustle and bustle and all of that. And they seem more excited. People used to be kind of mean looking, but they seem like they're glad to be here and to be a part of it. So I like it.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you, Nidra. Any other questions or comments?
Well, as the next person thinks about their question or comment, I can say that there have been tremendous changes in the library. There was a card catalog with little, almost index-sized cards and drawers that you pulled out, and it was right down there. But now we have everything online. The technology here is amazing, I say, and it's not just because Dr. Glenda Thornton is here. Some of my best friends are librarians, and I spend so much time in the library, especially on the third floor. Bill is so passionate about everything. You ask him a Centaur question, and even in his emails, I said to him, you can see that he's pounding on the podium when he's talking about Centaur. And it is a beautiful thing to find people who are excited about history, and I find those people in the library, not just Bill Becker, but also Bill Barrow, the other Bill, across the way, and Lynn Byko. So this is a great place to be in the world, and thanks to the technology, which I could never have envisioned in the 1970s, that I would have a telephone with no cord, that I would have a computer that I could carry in my purse, right? There's no wires. But they said to me when I was in grad school at Case in the early 1990s that CWRU was the most wired campus in the country. But now we're pretty wired down here at Cleveland State. We had some problems early on. Some buildings, you would lose things, but I haven't had those things happen to me in recent years. And I think that's a sign of progress, that we're keeping up with the technology. Yesterday, in my last semester as a faculty member, I had my first video conference with a brilliant writer who is based in Denver, Colorado, but with the Center for E-Learning here. They were in touch with her. She was able to download whatever software she needed for video conferencing. We were able to go into this really smart classroom, distance learning classroom that I didn't even know existed in room 207, second floor of the main classroom building. We had a student assistant from e-learning. It was so smooth. And I said, I think I'm smarter for having gone through that, and sort of wish, no regrets, maybe I wish I had discovered that sooner, but it's nice to know that it's here in case we need it.
All right, the cookies are getting cold, so I have to kind of wrap us up here. Just a couple of housekeeping details before we conclude. Dr. Williams' book, Cleveland State University 50 Years, is for sale here today. So Dr. Williams will be happy to sign a copy for you. You can also purchase this book at the Viking Outfitters store in the Student Center, as well as online, csuohio.edu/50th book. Mr. Becker mentioned the exhibit just across the way there. I strongly encourage you to check it out. A lot of excellent memorabilia from the university displayed there, put together by Sarah Benedict. That's going to be on view through mid-April. And I want to tell you also that our anniversary celebration continues with the next installment of the 50th Anniversary Presidential Forums. And that's on Wednesday, March 4th in the Student Center with a forum titled, From Laboratory to Wall Street, How Hopes and Dreams Enter the Marketplace. You can get more information on that at csuohio.edu/50/forums. And on that note, once again, I want to thank Dr. Williams and Mr. Becker for the lively and illuminating conversation. Many thanks also to Glenda and Barb and the whole staff of the library for hosting us today. And most importantly, I want to thank all of you for joining us and being here. Now, please join us for some light refreshments, and let's do it again in 50 years.